Thanks in part to exploring more of the PC Engine library, I've been on a kick of trying out games from Japan that have just never been on my radar. So let's check out some gems from the Super Nintendo library that mostly never left Japan. One of my favorite parts of being a retro gamer is still exploring these huge back catalogs of games that I just never heard of or never got around to playing. I have a big blind spot for the SNES library in general, as I had a Sega Genesis as a kid and didn't get a Super Nintendo of my own until the Mini was released in line with the Nintendo 64. I didn't try expanding that little collection until much later as well. I'm also just not a big JRPG fan, which is what most people still to this day talk about when it comes to the Super Nintendo. There are still some gems to be found in the Super Nintendo library, not just for someone like me, but even for someone a lot more familiar with it. Open that search up to the Super Famicom, and I'm getting the impression there are a lot of unexplored titles. So let's check out a few that I think deserve a little attention. Starting with something that might be the most familiar to you, I have Do-Re-Mi Fantasy, Milon's Doki Doki Adventure, released in 1996. This is a Hudson Soft game that is a sequel to the very different NES game Milon Secret Castle. Milon Secret Castle was a platformer but more of a puzzle or maze title that feels very rooted in arcade design, with single rooms of breakable blocks and hidden collectibles. Do-Re-Mi Fantasy is an adorable platformer that takes all of its cues from Super Mario World, and I love it for it. As Milon, you'll be going mostly from left to right in platforming stages, avoiding obstacles and hopping on enemies. Pretty standard stuff, but Hudson mixes it up by keeping the bubble blowing mechanic of the original NES game. This is the only way to actually beat enemies. Jumping on them actually just stuns them. What you need to do is trap them in a bubble and then run up to them so they fling away off the screen. It's all really well done too. Controlling Milon is really smooth and he has a nice amount of speed and jump. The difficulty is about what you expect through the whole game as well, with maybe a few bumps here and there, but nothing that can't be worked out after a few tries. You also have some extra power-ups like Bubblegum that rescues you from a fall and Bubble Wand bonuses that extend your reach. Milon also has 3 hits rather than 1 or the standard 2 each time his clothes change colors from green, blue, and then red, but you can find his little clothes in the level to regain those hits. Milon's goal for each world is to get through each level until you reach a little house where someone lives that can help Milon purify a magical musical instrument. Seriously, he needs these magical musical instruments to fight the big final boss at the end named Amon, who stole the forest music and kidnapped his fairy friend. To do this is a 3-step process, well, except for the first world, which you kind of skip over all of this. First, in each level, you need to find the hidden stars before exiting. If you miss it, you can always revisit that completed level to find it later. But once all the levels are beaten and all the stars are found, you need to fight the boss of that world to claim the magical instrument, then that fancy musician in the cabin of each world can play it for you to unlock the power again. As you collect each one, you get a new power to use to solve level puzzles and move around the stage. It's a charming premise and one done so well that you can't help but smile through it. Hudson obviously put lots of thought and effort into Do-Re-Mi Fantasy, and I'm surprised it isn't way more appreciated. It does some stuff that feels very derivative of other games in the genre, especially Super Mario World, but it oozes so much charm. I find it easy to look right past any of that. The design of all the worlds is so fun, even if they all again feel very obvious, like a candy world, sky, forest, etc. Each world even has a very Mario-style ghost house level. Music in the game though is perfect and really matches the vibes of each world and even goes very minimal and ethereal from time to time. If I had any complaints about Do-Re-Mi Fantasy, it would be that some of the boss fights can be a bit rough, and a couple of the levels are a little more maze-like than they should be for the kind of game it is. But I can never recommend this game enough for just how adorable and fun it is. This game never left Japan in its original release in 1996. Not surprising considering how late that was in the SNES lifespan. It hit the Wii Virtual Console for all regions though, but remained untranslated. Today, there is a really nice translation pack if you want it, but it's completely unneeded. The dialogue in the game does not need to be understood to play it. It is way too expensive to import though, in my opinion, but give it a shot on an EverDrive or emulator, you won't regret it. Twinbee is usually fondly remembered as an adorable vertical shooter, sometimes called a cute-em-up, that originally hit arcades in 1985. But in 1994, Konami took a hard left and decided to make Twinbee a platformer of sorts with Poppin' Twinbee, Rainbow Bell Adventures. This choice is cheating a little bit. Rainbow Bell Adventures did release in Europe that same year, and then it hit the Wii U Virtual Console in 2014. But I felt like its relative obscurity keeps it relevant to this little video. Plus, it's really cool. Rainbow Bell Adventures is a genre hybrid of sorts. It reminds me a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog and how fast you traverse many levels and maneuver around enemies and obstacles. But it also has a bit of a classic arcade design aesthetic, similar to games like Flicky. You have these floating shelves of pathways that loop around a giant stage with a starting point and goalposts that you need to get to. You can even pull up a map, which makes it pretty obvious that these levels loop, and see where the exit is. Having a map is good because the level design is super unbalanced. Some you can just blow through, spending no time collecting any items or fighting any enemies, but others are super maze-like and just confusing, really overstaying their welcome. This is the biggest strike against the game. Things feel a little slapped together on occasion. In each level, you basically just need to find the goal, and in fact, there is a par for each course that you see at the end screen. But you can explore the level fully and find collectibles, grab as many bells as possible, kill every enemy in sight, and find hidden exits. It is kind of neat that they give you the option to play however you want. You can pick between 3 different players as well to mix it up even further. Twinbee is the most balanced, with your power bars the same length for when you charge up a shot or charge up a jump, but Winbee and Gwinbee switch up their 2 jump and charge bars. As you go through each level, you can grab new weapons and power up your various abilities by beating enemies and grabbing the falling colored bells, just like classic Twinbee. While I believe each gets the same gun, the characters have their own little spin, like Twinbee getting a mallet and Gwinbee getting a rattle because Gwinbee is a baby. Why is one of the characters a baby? There are bosses at the end of a collection of stages, and they are really fun, if a bit on the easy side, with most of the difficulty coming from them being large and in charge. Honestly, the whole game is a bit on the easy side for the most part, with the game having those randomly confusing stages being the most challenging of it. Rainbow Bell Adventures is a super charming game though, with a big bright color palette, great character designs, and fun music. I really suggest giving it a chance, and with the PAL port, you don't have to mess with the Japanese language barrier. Not that there's much of one, but you have the option. The PAL version does rearrange a few things like the level path you take on the map, so keep that in mind. If you really love Valis and Castlevania and you need something to play one evening, Ghost Sweeper Mikami is the perfect game for you. Released towards the end of 1993 and developed by Natsume, this action title was based on the series of the same name, where you follow the adventures of an exorcist who wears tiny dresses and high heels and has the longest legs in existence. Not surprisingly, the full name of the SNES game actually translates to Ghost Sweeper Mikami, the Exorcist Has a Nice Body. As I said, the game plays a lot like Valis with a little bit of Castlevania thrown in. You play as Riko Mikami in her signature dress and heels ensemble and a baton to smack all the ghouls, monsters, and ghosts in her way. While there is some platforming to be had, and you can even grab platforms and flip up to them, verticality and platforming sections are not the main focus. Ghost Sweeper Mikami is mostly about smacking the enemies in front of you as you run to the end of the level, and that's perfectly okay. But it does change things up a bit a few times with mixed results. At one point, Mikami gets shrunk down and has to ride a cat across the rooftops for a frustrating but still fun auto-scrolling section. You'll need to time your smacks with a baton as well as duck and jump over obstacles at the right moment. Later, it becomes a shooter for a brief time while Mikami rides a broom like a witch. The control for that section is not the best, sadly. The reach with your magic baton is surprisingly long, and there's a nice speed to it as well. You can also pick up certain power-ups to make it a ranged attack like a bolt of energy or 2 bolts that fire in a V pattern. Enemies vary from something static that likes to throw or shoot something at you to things that like to hop around, and there are even a few Medusa head style flying pattern enemies. But none of them present much of a challenge outside of existing, which might be my main complaint for the game overall. Ghost Sweeper is kind of easy outside of a few rough patches of level design. You can probably beat it in around an hour pretty easily. At the end of each group of levels, or report as it's called in the game, Mikami runs her own Ghost Sweeper agency, is a boss fight. A couple of these are really fun and can be a challenge if you don't have a power-up, and some of them are basically the opposite. I really like a few of them though, like the creepy doll or even the clown that has a second phase with a rat. But some of them, like the blonde vampire, are just random and not exactly fun. With each one you defeat, you collect a crystal in a very Castlevania-style moment, and each of these get placed into a statue that, spoiler alert, releases the big final baddie. The run-up to this boss fight was the worst moment in the game for me. The level tries to do some weird gravity stuff where you need to make your own platforms to get to the top. It wasn't exactly a fun level, and add typical end boss frustration, I felt like the game left worse than it started. But overall, Ghost Sweeper Mikami is a great game. The art style is nice and stays true to the anime, and it has some amazing music. There are lots of cutscenes, but you don't need a strong grasp of Japanese to play the game, and it isn't that expensive to import, so definitely give it a go. So there are 3 gems from the Super Famicom library that never found their way to the United States during the original release. At least with Do-Re-Mi Fantasy and Magical Bell Adventure, they did hit digital services, but the Wii U shop is closing in March 2023, and the Wii eShop has been gone for years now. Even with those releases, both continued to fly under the radar, and you need to check them out. Ghost Sweeper Mikami will probably never see another release, since I doubt anyone will ever want to mess with those licenses again. But that's it for this episode of RetroActive. Let me know in the comments if you have some favorite Super Famicom games that never made a splash here in the States or internationally, and as always, I'll see you next time. Hey, this is Kevin, once again thanking you so much for watching another episode of RetroActive. Please hit that like button, subscribe, all the things it's supposed to say, and I do want to remind you that I do have a Patreon and a Discord. Links will be in the description. Have a wonderful day.